One of the most infamous magical operations undertaken in modern times has to be the operation of the Abramelin ritual performed by Aleister Crowley at House Boleskine near Loch Ness in Scotland around the dawn of the 20th century. Allegedly, Crowley never completed the grueling ceremonial regime, and the evil he summoned but failed to banish still lurks in the area. Boleskine House itself is currently undergoing restoration after a series of disastrous fires, and in the companion episode to this one, I'll be chatting with some members of the Foundation spearheading that effort. Make sure to check out that conversation as well. The operation Crowley undertook is detailed in a magical text known as the Book of Abramelin, a text which seeks to summon one's holy guardian angel and control demonic forces through the use of magical squares. Indeed, this text has gone on to deeply influence the religion Crowley founded, Thelema, and continues to inspire occultists to this very day. It's even been made the center of a wonderful occult film, A Dark Song, that I reviewed in another episode. Check out the link in the card above if you want to see that analysis. In this episode, we're going to explore the Book of Abramelin, discuss its origins, and the magic, allegedly, within its pages. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. The Book of Abramelin purports to be a magical system developed by the Egyptian Jewish sage Abramelin and described by a certain German Jewish magician named Abraham in the mid-15th century. The text survives in about a dozen manuscripts in several languages spread throughout Europe. The oldest and most authoritative are in German and date to right around 1608, roughly the same time as the Lesser Key of Solomon was being prepared in England. An Italian manuscript has also been found, and the German of at least the first book was translated into Hebrew, and an incomplete version of the text was also translated into French in the 18th century. It was in fact this incomplete and somewhat defective French manuscript that Mathers rendered into English and which has gone on to be legend in modern occult circles. Of course, the most interesting of those problems with the text involve the missing word squares in Book 4 and the exact recipe for the anointing oil famous enough now to be referred simply as Abramelin oil. The German text itself was printed by Peter Hammer in 1725. The text itself is 4 separate books, the first describing the rather romantic wandering of a certain Abraham in search of arcane and true magical learning. After meeting with a host of charlatans and necromancers, as one does, Abraham makes his way to Egypt where he meets the true adept, Abramelin. During his stay, Abraham learns the true magic, which comprises Book 3 and 4 of the Book of Abramelin as we have it. So how much of this tale is historical? Well, it's hard to say. The occult scholars who recently translated and published the text argue that Abraham was in fact Yaakov Molin, born around 1365 and died roughly in 1427. He was a posek, or legal scholar, living in mid-14th to mid-15th century Germany. To be honest, I can't really admit to being convinced of the arguments made by the text, and indeed if the book were even written by a Jewish sage at all. The historical timelines of the Maharil and Abraham don't really seem to align. The travel story reads to me much more like a medieval romance, and the logistics of travel for a medieval Jew all throughout the known world at that time, the historical personages that are also listed in the text, and the overall tenor of the Maharil's other known output as a halachist, all to me point away from this being a historically accurate account. Further, I tend to agree with Gershom Scholem that there's actually very little evidence this text was even written by a medieval Jewish person at all. Despite mentioning the Talmud and the Kabbalah, there isn't a single quotation or reference to those sources. Indeed, there's basically nothing Kabbalistic about this book at all. Further, the demonic hierarchies described in the text are clearly from Christian, not Jewish demonologies. Also, the odd ecumenical tone of the text, just pick a Sabbath, any Sabbath, Jewish or Christian, would be incomprehensible to a medieval Jewish legal scholar and probably to many Christians as well. Also, Sholem points out that no Jewish person, much less a rabbi, would ever name their son Lamech, a direct descendant of Cain of all people. However, I will name two exceptions to this line of thinking that do give me a bit of pause. One, the concept of the holy guardian angel does in fact have some Kabbalistic echoes, despite being a largely Christian idea. More on that in a second. Two, the magic squares and demonic hierarchies do contain some Hebrew words, although they're sometimes weirdly scrambled, especially considering if this text were written by a learned medieval rabbi. For instance, in chapter 15 of book 4, we're given word squares for magically producing food and drink. The first square for bread begins with I-A-Y-N, while the third for wine begins with L-E-C-H-E-M. With even basic knowledge of Hebrew, you can see that something has gotten switched up here. The first square reads a corrupt version of yain, or wine, and clearly lechem is for bread. That's the Hebrew word for bread, but they're switched. However, the second square for meat, however, begins correctly with B-A-S-A-R, basar, the word for meat in Hebrew. Hebrew words pepper the text, but often haphazardly, which makes more sense to me as the work of a Christian with some basic knowledge of Hebrew dating from the late 16th to early 17th centuries, rather than that of a learned rabbi of the early 15th century. More on the magic squares in a bit as well. The second book deals with magical spells that Abraham discovered or developed outside of his learning with Abramelin. And these spells cover a wide range of effects, and it should be noted that there's a curious absence of what I would call antisocial magic. That is, magic designed specifically to harm other people. Though one spell does make you invisible to your enemies that are pursuing you by blinding them, at least to your presence. And of course, there are the ubiquitous erotic binding spells, which are always worrisome in terms of the ethics of consent. Here we have spells for curing diseases, ending animosity, aiding in fertility and childbirth, to combating ghosts and various types of natural disasters, which typically take the form of a ritual performance along with an incantation culled from the Hebrew Bible, most often the Psalms. Generally, this section is rather typical of the kind of magic that goes back as far as the Greek magical papyri that we see basically ubiquitously in many medieval grimoires. It is without a doubt that the third and fourth sections of the text have gotten much of the attention, especially among modern occultists. The third text deals with an elaborate 18-month-long ceremonial operation involving a progressively intensive cycle of prayer, anointing, fasting, and abstinence by which one receives communion with what the text calls one's holy guardian angel. Of course, this operation is marked by its ritual athleticism. It's something akin to a mystical marathon. However, it's also marked by just how little of the trappings of traditional ceremonial magic are present. Here, magical circles and sigils are completely missing. In fact, we're told that pentacles and the like are the money that devils use to buy our souls. No longer do we have incantations in eldritch languages, etc. While the instructions can be weirdly specific, there's also some degree of latitude. For instance, the best time of the year to start the ritual is just after Passover, but you can kind of start it whenever. Abstinence and fasting are required during some specific times, but others it's more relaxed. You can have sex. The ceremony can be performed both indoors and out, and you can even carry on with day-to-day business in most cases. Of course, some things are rather specific, such as the composition of the anointing oil and the incense, the cleanliness of the ritual room, the directions that its windows face, etc. I guess I should probably say something about the now famous or infamous Abramelin oil. It's clearly based on the Shemen HaMishcha described in Exodus 30. The problem for both oils is exactly what these compounds are, especially the Kaneh Bosem, which isn't clear, and has been linked with everything from calamus root to cannabis. All these things are possible. I'm not going to wade into the waters of that discussion here. That's going to be a future episode. But what does matter here is that there is a persistent confusion in the editions about whether Calamus, which clearly appears in the most reliable German manuscripts and the 1725 Hammer edition, or Galangerut, a kind of cousin of Ginger, which appears in both the Mathers and in the recent Dehn and Guth version for some reason. Further, Aleister Crowley also introduced a version using only essential oils, which further complicates this whole business. Well, what's the right answer? I have no idea, but you can apparently buy both versions on Amazon.com for $14.99, so support your local occult oil maker. The concept of the holy guardian angel has also gone on to great fame in modern occultism, especially in the Thelemic religion that's developed by Aleister Crowley. The concept of an individual guardian angel never became a terribly popular idea in Kabbalah or Judaism more generally, though it does appear in the Rashi, which ain't nothing. Indeed, as early as the Bible, angels and demons, lesser so, are typically assigned to people groups like national entities rather than individuals, like in the Book of Daniel, for instance. Again, another concept that tells me this text is ultimately of Christian origins, with something of an exception I'll discuss in a moment. Regardless, the apparent goal of the ritual is to converse with one's holy guardian angel, thereby learning further magical secrets, being corrected upon one's personal failures, and in modern occultism, learning one's true will, an incredibly complicated concept developed in the religion of Thelema. I will, however, say that this all does bear a somewhat distant similarity to a form of mysticism that existed centuries before the Abramelin text. In Sar Torah mysticism, one summons an angel known as the Prince of the Torah, hence the name Sar Torah, to immediately learn rabbinical lore rather than having to study. And if you've ever had to study the Talmud in a yeshiva for 8 hours a day, you'll realize how welcome magical knowledge acquisition would be. Further, there's a concept emerging from Kabbalah in which a kind of angelic doppelganger can appear to the mystic in especially ecstatic prophetic state. This idea appears in a host of Kabbalistic, mystical, and magical texts. For instance, the idea seems to go back to Proclus. It appears in the Zohar and also in the discussions of one's perfected nature in the Picatrix. They're all basically forms of this lineage. And all of this is somewhat akin to the idea of the astral body, though it's primarily known in Hebrew as one's tselem, or perfect image. I'll be doing an episode on both of these concepts in the future, so if you're curious, stay tuned. At any rate, while the Sar Torah mysticism and the tselem astral body concepts are similar, perhaps to the holy guardian angel of the Abramelin operation, I think these similarities are much more typological than they are historical. Following the revelation of one's holy guardian angel, one is then able to turn to the invocation and manipulation of basically the entire infernal army. Like many texts of angelic and demonic magic, the Abramelin imagines the demonic legions as composed of a hierarchy very much like that of medieval feudalism. And here we're met with kings, dukes, servants, and the servants of their servants. Many of the bigger deal demons here are known from other magical texts, such as the Munich Necromancer's Manual or the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum, which forms the basis for the demons of the Goetia in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Though here we're not provided with all the fabulous demonic seals of other texts, and many of the names of the demons they're kind of surprising. We have Cohen, or priest, Nagid, or leader, Nasi, or president, both odd names for servants. Another is called Neshama, or soul. There's a Greek one called Soterion, which means salvation. We have another Hebrew one named Magid, or preacher for some reason. Again, these are all kind of weird names for demonic servants. Once summoned, which again basically requires asking at this point, there are no magical circles with strange seals, etc., these demonic forces can be basically harangued into doing one's bidding by the use of certain word squares paired with certain spirits and further rituals. Of course, word squares date back millennia, with the Sator square being the most famous. In this example, we have a case where the spirit Oriens, Paimon, who you may recognize, Eraton, and Amayon all work together to accomplish the magic of, say, the 17th chapter of the 4th book, which specifically has to do with traveling in the air. Specifically, if you want to travel on a cloud, you would use a word square beginning with the Hebrew word anan, unsurprisingly, the Hebrew word for cloud. But it also contains the word NASA, N-A-S-A? Yeah, NASA, flying on a cloud. Book 4 contains dozens of these word squares which accomplish a wide range of magic, from discovering the future to working in mines to success in alchemy, or esotericism, transforming people into animals, recovering treasure, healing sickness, preventing magic, creating sickness and money, and even summoning spirits to appear as monkeys and play music and do acrobatics and juggle for you. Yeah, holy guardian angel, then spirit monkey entertainment. You get it all in the Abramelin. One can also discover future word squares by inquiring of the spirits generally or one holy guardian angel. Of course, all of this comes with warnings not to share it, not to sell it, and to only perform the magic for good, not evil ends, and of course, keep it a secret, because secret monkey magic juggling secrets. The Book of Abramelin has gone on to become enormously influential, despite being known primarily through a basically incomplete and jumbled version produced by Mathers. Foundational modern occult concepts like the true will and the holy guardian angel have all become central in the spirituality developed by Aleister Crowley, along with things like the Abramelin oil used in some permutation remain a widely used ritual tool. Whatever the origins of the text, there can be no doubt that this book will persist in its important role in Western occultism, even if it's more celebrated than actually known. If you're interested in the history of magic, the occult, and Kabbalah, make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica. And also, if you want to support my work of making scholarly, accessible, and free content on topics in esotericism, consider supporting my work on Patreon or with a one-time donation. Your support makes Esoterica possible, and I'm very humbled by your support. Thank you. Of course, the Mathers edition of the Book of Abramelin is an absolute classic, but as I pointed out earlier, was rendered from an incomplete and defective French translation. Despite this, the text is a classic, especially interested in the development of the occult in the 20th century. It's just worth reading for that alone. As of early 2021, there is no academic critical edition of the text to my knowledge, and the Dehn and Guth version at this point is the go-to edition. They translate and check the text against the more reliable German manuscripts, and even do a good bit of comparing between the manuscripts that have come down to us. I have to admit being rather skeptical of many of the conclusions they reach about the historical situation of the text and its authors, but your mileage may vary. The text is, of course, very worth getting if you've ever only studied the Mathers version of the Book of Abramelin. If you're interested in the history of ritual magic, a slightly dated but classic text, of course, is Ritual Magic by Butler, and the edited volume Conjuring Spirits by Claire Fenger also remains a central text for understanding ritual and ceremonial magic as it developed in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. And while you're at it, Klassen's Transformations of Magic is also crucial for this study as well. In fact, if you're interested in ceremonial magic and the history of ritual magic generally, you're just going to have to probably start buying or checking out most of these volumes in Penn State's Magic and History series. They are all really, really great, so consult those if you are able at all. If you're interested in a translation and analysis of the Tsar Torah mysticism, recall this was a means by which to summon the angelic Torah prince to supernaturally learn Jewish lore, then the absolute best text here is Matthew Schwartz's Scholastic Magic, Ritual and Revelation in Early Jewish Mysticism. This really wonderful volume explores and analyzes the surviving texts of this form of magical mysticism and is well worth checking out. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be doing an episode on both Tsar Torah mysticism and this sort of astral body mysticism that we see in the Kabbalah. I'll be doing a video on both of those at some point in the future. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and you've been watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.